So we're back to medieval philosophy, and we're now looking into the mystical tradition. Eventually, the mystical tradition will show very clear influences of Plato and of other traditions, but the mystical traditions are actually modeled by Pseudo Dionysius. But before we continue with Pseudo Dionysius, where are we so far? No? So the encounter of two traditions, Greek philosophy and the Judeo-Christian tradition, is something that's really worthy of reflection at this point. To a certain extent, on the one hand, we saw Christianity's assimilation of philosophical worldviews and concepts, and they use this assimilation as a mode of explaining and evangelizing. The assimilation, which started, as I said, as we started to see in Justin Martyr, Clement of Alexandria, and one that will continue even in the Council of Nicaea, will reach in Augustine and will be further developed by those who follow him. Boethius, the one who wrote the Consolations of Philosophy, with a form of argumentation, will resemble the Platonic and even the Aristotelian literature, which we also need to pay attention to. So these are the things that you have to take into consideration when you look into this one. Uh, So the reality of God, therefore, cannot be contained within concepts and conceptions. And this was something that was coming out in the rest of the thinkers that would follow. Um, we got these insights, of course, from the mystics and the monks. So while the philosophers were hasty to put God on equal terms with being and the good, which is an philosophical tradition that we inherited from Plato, the mystical tradition reminds us of the absolute transcendence of God. And the absolute transcendence of God simply points to the inability or inability of the human person to really conceptualize God for that matter. This has roots, of course, on the ancient religions and the Jewish tradition that God as He is cannot be perceived, and that only those who are dead and who will die can see God. We know that, for example, from Exodus, even Moses, while he did see the burning bush, hindi pala golden, burning bush, the pillar of cloud or pillar of fire, will not have a direct vision of who God is. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, it is only in Exodus 30 where God will tell him, okay, you want to see me? I will pass by at this time. You will see me. And when you see me, you will only see my back but never my face. So the concept, therefore, that God is being good and true is a concept that we will learn from mystics and monks. But even before the mystics and monks, we already know that concepts from Plato. No, Plato already laid that understanding down. The absolute mystery we continuously find articulated seems to say that this absolute mystery is not really better known, but is meant to be experienced, not simply thought, loved, and not simply understood. And the question that is worthy of reflection is, how then do we not miss this? How then do we avoid uh, conceptualizing, simply reducing God to mere concepts when he cannot simply be reduced to mere concepts? Um, so, should the Dionysius the Areopagite simply speaks about it in two ways. No? There are two ways when we start talking about speaking, conceptualizing, or making sense of God. we always look at it in terms of two ways. One is the cataphatic way, catapathy, which affirms that God is, no? And in the isness there, well, we can say that he is characterized by concepts and metaphors, and that we can, in fact, conceptualize, make sense of God. But also, on the other hand, there's the apophatic way, and the apophatic way negates these affirmations, saying that we cannot say who God is, we can only say who God is not. In the history of philosophy, these ways are put together or articulated by Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite or Dionysius the Areopagite. We call him Pseudo-Dionysius or Dionysius, but we're not actually sure if he is Dionysius. That's why we always say Pseudo-Dionysius. What we know for sure about who Pseudo-Dionysius is that he lived 5th century to 6th century Anno Domini or before Common Era, and he's a philosopher and theologian who wrote a treatises based on the insights of the church fathers. And the treatises, the divine transcendence or the divine names, are made available to you. He's called Pseudo Dionysius because he's thought to be Dionysius the Areopagite, Bishop of Athens, that you find or read in the Acts of the Apostles. Or some will even say that he is Saint Denis, the first bishop of Paris. But we're not actually sure who he is. That's why we call him simply Pseudo Dionysius. No? That's why the inclusion of the word pseudo there is very important, because that is indicative that he is not either Dionysius the Areopagite, as the ideas are just so advanced to be coming from the 1st century, neither is he Saint Denis. Let's look at the ideas that are embedded in the divine theology or mystical theology. First is the divine gloom, no? Gloom, no? Encircling gloom, darkness, kadiliman, no? Yun yung tinitingnan natin doon, kadiliman. The Trinity, which exceeds all being, deity, and goodness, guide us to that topmost height of mystic lore, which exceedeth light and more than exceedeth knowledge. Here, worth emphasizing in this section is that it exceedeth light, and more than that, exceedeth also knowledge. The reality of God as true carries within it three other characteristics. The truthfulness of God carries within it God's simplicity, absoluteness, and impalpability. And I'd like to emphasize those three concepts. Simplicity. No? God is so simple, there is nothing that can be said about God. The simplicity of God doesn't allow things to be said about it. I've emphasized that as it's important to say we can only expound complex ideas. We can only expound ideas we can subdivide into smaller parts. We can only clarify ideas that are very complex in nature. Not so with simplicity, diba? So if you're simply holding a ball, there's nothing to speak about it, just that it has equal sides. But even in terms of equal sides, there's just nothing to be said. Yun yung sinasabi ko. Wala tayong nasasabi tungkol dyan. No? So, simplicity. Absolute. It's everywhere. Impalpable. Dapat yung simplicity na yon hindi kayang it's not palpable. No? That's impalpability. So that in the face of the divine gloom, what needs to be done, says Pseudo Dionysius, is this: leave the senses. When we are trying to understand God, we have to leave the senses. We cannot allow the senses to define our understanding, conception of God. Ganun lang yon. Leave the senses. And the activities of the intellect and all things that the senses or the intellect can perceive, and all things in this world of nothingness, or in that world of being, and that thine understanding be laid to rest, thou strain so may far as thou mayest towards a union with him whom neither being nor understanding can contain. In this section, what you need to understand is how these understanding, conceptions, interpretations of God actually goes beyond us, and that it going beyond us plays a very important role precisely because it allows us to comprehend, it allows us to appreciate, it allows us to capture even a reality that is not a concept. It's easy to think of God as a concept, like an object, but he is not. And therefore, union is the suggestion of the mystics, not understanding, but union. God as the cause of all and above all. The second theme. Offer him that transcends all things the praises of a transcended hymnody, which we shall do by denying or removing all things that are like as men who, carving a statue out of marble, remove all the impediments that hinder the clear perceptive of the latent image, and by this mere removal display the hidden statue itself in its hidden beauty. The imagery is quite interesting. When you carve, you remove the negative aspects so that the positive aspect will surface. You remove the unnecessary things so that what is real comes to the fore. Here you see the Platonic image of uncovering the form of a thing, but not just the Platonic image of uncovering a form of the thing, but of also manifesting, no? Manifesting, uh, demonstrating the form, no? Uh, so God therefore is the cause of all, yes, but also as the cause of all is above all. No? Cannot be the same as the all. That's why it's very important to recognize that God is not simply removed as a being or understood as a being precisely because there's just a greater expression, manifestation than being. Third point, the affirmative and the negative expressions of naming God. What is meant by God's anger, grief, and indignation, or the divine inebriation and wrath? What is meant by God's oath and his malediction, by slumber and awaking, and all the other inspired imagery of allegoric symbolisms? When we read scriptures and we read there God is angry, or 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 God's wrath, for example, what are these? Chudda Dionysius explains these are mere personifications, uh but not with things, no, but with a divine reality that make all things possible. When we speak and describe, for example, an object, and the description of the object is adjectival, the adjective is a personification, right? So we speak of objects as if they are alive. But the personification that happens with any reference to God isn't that same personification. The personification of objects like these are different. And why are they different? Precisely because they point more to the source of all personification. It's the other way around. That's why we will say, for the more that we soar upwards, the more our language becomes restricted to the compass of purely intellectual conceptions. The more we ascend, and here you see the language of ascent, of going up, of of growing up, our talk and our discussion regarding the essence of God takes us to an ascent, no? To lighten our mind and spirit towards ascending to Him simpliciter. No? So here the essence of God is understood as an ascent uh, that is eventually putting our concepts and abstract ideas to shame. No? Something that puts our ideas to shame. He is not any of the things sensibly perceived. Of course, this idea is not purely new to Shuddha Dionysius. We actually read it as Augustine. Augustine already said, "Si comprehendis non est Deus." No, if you've understood God, it's not God you've understood. That's what it means. And here you have to see very clearly the play of words that he is working with, right? Uh, the universal cause transcending all things is neither impersonal nor lifeless, nor irrational, nor without understanding. No? First things first, when we understand God, we're not talking about an object. No, it's a person. It's a person. Uh, that's why truth in the Greek sense is an idea, but in the Christian sense, it's a person. In short, it's not a material body, yes, and therefore does not possess outward shape. It's just different, different. And that's something we need to pay attention to. It is not soul or mind or endowed with the faculty of imagination, conjecture, reason, or understanding. Neither of these. God, as we can speak about what he does and what he is, cannot be confined within a particular concept or reality. He will always transcend that reality and will always escape its conception. Plain and simple. I'm almost in the end, so just hold on. No? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Just 7 more slides. So God's reality transcends what can be perceived, known, and understood. God is beyond, no? Beyond all of those. Why is that so? Because God is God. Absolute, pure, and simple. This slide is something you can spend on a lot of times simply reflecting on. What does it mean that the reality of God transcends what can be perceived, transcends what can be known, transcends what can be understood? What does that mean? Secondly, that God is God. What does that mean too? What does it mean for God to be pure, simple, and absolute? What are the implications of this reflection? So how then do we even speak of concepts, or how then can we even speak of God? Uh, while concepts stand, we have to take note that they do not capture the reality of God. These concepts do not capture the reality of God. Paul Ricoeur in the Divine Names says that it's asymptotic in themselves. And when we say asymptotic, these are two lines that will go very close to each other, asymptotes, but they will never touch each other. No? That's what it means. That's why Paul Ricoeur will say they fade into a vanishing point. If that's the case, then what can we say about Christ, right? That's something to reflect on. Does this have something to do with reality also? So in the same vein, but also in a different way, all creatures, all creatures share in this mystery. This in turn makes the poetic and the symbolic possible, realizable. That's why we can go back to the significant poem of Gerald Manley Hopkins, God's Grandeur, right? The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil, crushed. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil. And wears man's smudge, and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all these, nature is never spent there. There lies the deepest freshness, deep down things. And though the last lights of the black west went, O morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breasts and with bright wings. It's a very beautiful poem by Gerald Manley Hopkins. Two more slides. Does this have also something to do with ourselves? Augustine also would say, ipse mihi magna quaestio. I have become a great question unto myself. I have become a terra difficultatis, a difficult soil. The mystery of God, therefore, enables us to dwell on the mystery of our own selves. Something to consider. So what does this tell us also about our own self-conception, self-perception, our characteristics, our vocation? This leads us to the dynamic nature of our own selves, the dynamic nature between what is given and what is chosen.